Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. A Door County man convicted in a cold case murder wants a new trial. Richard Pierce is serving a life sentence for the 1975 murder of his wife, Carol Jean Pierce.
Investigators never found her body. After a 6-day trial and almost 10 hours of deliberation, a jury found Pierce guilty back in 2022. It was the first conviction in the state to be made without a body. And now Pierce's defense attorney argues that the 88-year-old did not get a fair trial. Brittany Schmidt looked over the arguments and has new details in a First Alert update.
In the 18-page motion for post-conviction relief, Richard Pierce's defense attorney argues her client did not get a fair trial in Door County. Marcella DePeters writes the trial court misused its discretion twice by allowing hearsay testimony from witnesses that she says helped create motive, ultimately convicting Pierce. In the first instance during trial, the judge allowed a neighbor to testify that Carol Jean Pierce told her, quote, "My husband told me he's going to kill me someday," end quote. That testimony was not given to police in 1981. In fact, investigators weren't aware of that statement until 28 years later in 2009. So the defense argues that helped, quote, invent a motive, was unduly prejudicial and impossible to rebut. The second instance involved a witness who described a stone-faced reaction by Pierce when he found out his wife may have been hitting on another man. The defense argues the state wanted the jury to believe Carol was unfaithful, and that was why Pierce killed her. Combined, the defense argues the state used both statements to create an unfounded motive for Mr. Pierce to kill his wife. While the state does not have to prove motive, the defense argues if they have one, it must be based on admissible evidence. During the trial, a small gardening rake was admitted into evidence. An investigator testified a human remains canine alerted to it. The defense argues, quote, human remains could be anything from blood to fingernails to a deceased person, end quote. The defense says there is a complete lack of any evidence that the rake was used to bury or dig up his wife. For these reasons, Pierce requests that the court grant him a new trial.
According to online documents, the state has yet to respond, but a judge has set an oral ruling date for October 18th. Reporting in the newsroom, Brittany Schmidt, Action 2 News.